Fonseca. Good afternoon to all. Honorable Minister, acknowledge your presence, and my former minister, Mr. Alhaji Cham. Mr. Baksture, I always acknowledge because there's a lot I learn from him whenever he is at a forum. And I'm hoping to listen to him at the forum, the panel discussion. My colleague permanent secretary is present. Good afternoon to you all. Slide, please. I think you all know about the definition. I don't have to talk about it already. The PPP unit have spoken about it. I'm so passionate about PPPs because I've been actually trained in PPPs, and I've worked in establishing, if not the first, but I mean a leading PPP under our ministry, that is the Gambia Submarine Cable Company. So, but what I wanted to just highlight here is that a PPP is always a long-term agreement between government entity and a private company for the provision of a public service. The public service is very key in the definition of PPP. I just wanted to highlight that. And there are revenue streams that are created, and how that revenue stream goes to finance for the private sector to recoup their investment over a period of time with profit. It's not just the investment, but it includes profit, and that is why it's given a longer period of time so that they'll be able to recoup that. And government also plays a role, and I think the Honorable Minister mentioned about the land and some funds they provided for their project. That land always is being asked by the private sector because it's easier for government to give land for them to acquire land, which may be very expensive in some countries. In Gambia, it's relatively cheap, I would say. But in some countries, land is very expensive. This is why PPP arrangements always look for government providing the land for their use. The guarantees rights of way. Rights of way normally is in the area of roads construction and telecommunications, where you lay the infrastructure along the roads. So this is why you have it there. At the end of the life of the PPP, the assets revert. I've seen the legal presentation about, okay, what do we do with the assets? The assets revert to government because it's a concession for you to provide, to help us have that infrastructure in place, and you recoup your investment with your profits, but then the asset becomes us. Ownership is very important. Next slide, please. And PPPs comes in different forms: service contracts, management contracts. They're all PPPs. It's just, these are all design and build contracts, build, operate, finance, you name it. We can go, these have been mentioned earlier, so we can go to the next slide. Now, when it comes to the WASIP project, which is the West Africa Regional Communication Infrastructure project, that has other West African countries involved. It's a regional project. We have a project, that's the Gambia project. The agreement we signed with the World Bank for the funding of $35 million project, and the $25 million went to the funding of the investment in the first submarine cable project we have in the country to improve our international telecommunications infrastructure. And the $10 million goes to the project implementation. Prior to the signing of the agreement, we have to go through a process. We also did a feasibility study of the funding and the feasibility of the PPP arrangement. And we were constrained by time. This is where flexibility comes in. We were constrained by time, so we had to compromise some of the steps we have to take. For example, when we were supposed to negotiate with the World Bank to really complete the grant element of this, we had a target time, and we have to make sure before the board sits, we get all the necessary documentations to the board at the World Bank, so that, because if they sit that time, we don't know when they are going to sit. So to kill that time, what we did is, we did not actually get the cabinet approval. What we did, we asked for a provisional cabinet approval, which the chairman of cabinet can provide, and that's the president of the republic. So we requested a provisional approval from cabinet while the process of cabinet approval goes, and this was granted, and we had to go into the negotiations in Dakar to finalize the loan. So next, please. Before we did, the conditions precedent for PPP is to have the policy and legal framework. I think when we were doing our PPP, the policy was not in place. No legal framework was in place. So we have to really rely on best practices, from other countries. to see how PPP are done. And we had to get a transaction advisor who worked on that, based on legal best practices. And that is how we created our own concession agreement. We defined the scope of the concession, and which was about 25 years. And that provided terms and conditions of the arrangement. And all parties agreed to that, and it was signed. That, led to the creation of the PPP. Regarding to I just want to make mention about the policies and laws. I think the legal presentation that was made, we're talking about some of the laws we have in place that may really inhibit the implementation of PPP in our country. Definitely those laws are not created to cater for PPPs. This is why you need specific laws that looks at those constraints to ensure that they are circumvented when you do PPP arrangement. You made mention of the committee at the level of the PPP, a committee of ministers to the cabinet approval, and you talked about the major tender board. Major tender board should not be a constraining factor because that committee, just like the major tender board, the procurements are different, the arrangements are different. The PPPs have specific requirements. This is why you need specific attention, and you need specific laws, you need specific structures to address. So this we have to bear in mind, when we get our laws in place. Either we have to make sure that we amend some of the laws, if need be, as mentioned by Bob. We can also have precedence over some of the laws we have in place. And this is all approved by Cabinet and the National Assembly. So once the law is approved by the National Assembly, you're able to implement according to that. So let that not be a constraining factor. I think we have to look at what makes PPP work. We have best practices, we go by that and make sure that our laws are not constraining factors to drive PPP in the Gambia. And the PPP agreement. The reason we had a PPP agreement, which we call Memorandum of Agreement between operators, that when the process was not ready, we need a mechanism to be put in place. So you have to be innovative, whereby we have kind of prior agreement of the members that yes, we all undertook to be part of this arrangement once everything is finalized, which we did, and that demarcated the shareholding, whereby, and also talked about the creation of the SPV, that's the Gambia Submarine Cable Company, and the shareholding was also agreed. Public sector 49%, that is government, GAMTEL and GAMCEL, that they own the 49%. The private sector, which includes the GSM operators and the ISPs, they own 51%, which was, it's like they are putting in 12.75 million towards that 25 million we wanted. And the company was limited by guarantee. The reason we had that in place is that the company is not going to be a revenue generating entity. It's just going to be a custody of the infrastructure on behalf of the shareholders. They make use of the infrastructure and make money because it's inbuilt into their structures. They provide the services. And this is why we had that creation to make sure that the company is limited by guarantee and not like any other company that is created to pay tax and other things. So, move on. The SPV. We did the sign of the consortium agreement on 20th September. That was after the PPP Memorandum of Agreement, 2011. And there is a declaration of trust because the GSC is just like a trust to the owners. So PPP can be different. It's just what you want to put in place and what makes it work. This is why the negotiation part and coming to agreement with the parties is very important. Just as the minister mentioned, they agreed on something, they can sit back, look at it, and see what works best for them. And the duration is 25 years. Next, please. The lessons learned, the policy and regulatory gaps. I think I mentioned about what we never had a policy or legal thing, but what we did is to look at best practices and make sure, because that did not stop the PPP happening. Because if we were waiting for that to happen, even by now we haven't got the law. So we didn't have got it. We would have been delayed by another 4 years by now. So we could not wait, but we have to look at best practices. Safeguarding the interests of the different owners. That's another difficult process because when we all negotiate, we look at what is in our best interest to make sure we move. So that's always a challenge. It's not easy. Mobilization of funds limitations. We talk about PPP, and I think most of the time we think of foreign investors. Well, why not we think of our local private investment. Now, when you come to that, there's a lot of limitations in mobilizing funds for some capital-intensive projects. So how do we work together and address this, provided we don't have donors that will come in to support, or we don't have international financing mechanisms in place? And yet we have projects that we need to deliver. The private sector needs to think about it. The banking sector, financial sector need to think about it. I think that's the major challenge we have. We're always too dependent on donor funds and international funds there, but at times, some of the projects we may have may not be attractive to foreign investors. So how do we make it happen with our private investors? The complexity of capital-intensive projects. This is why you need the expertise of the private sector. This is one of the key reasons why we're going for PPPs. One is capital, but then the other thing is having the capability, the human resource capability, the capacity, the know-how. We know the private sector will have really highly trained people. That's what the global norm anyway. And we believe the way they do business, if you get into these high capital intensive projects, they may run it better than public enterprises. This is what really motivate us to go into PPPs. And I think when I talk about the funding here, it was mentioned about how, based on the agreement, who receives revenue when it comes to a PPP. I mean, I don't think we should argue about that. If you expect someone to come and invest in what you cannot provide, you expect the person to really recoup that revenue. That how you share it depends on the agreement. If you share the revenue, all you need to do to make sure you put mechanisms in place where you can really authenticate revenue and what is your share so that it is paid to you. Or we should not be arguing about you providing the funds, but we're collecting the revenue, and then we all know when money gets into that government account. It's not easy. I mean, we're running with our public enterprises whereby GRA collects some funds for us. It's not easy. Even if when you get it, there is a delay. At times a month or two. We had an experience of what happened with the area councils here when the mechanism was changed. So these are things we have to bear in mind. When you do PPPs, I mean, most of the time with best practices, global norm, the private sector guys are entrusted to do all that. And because in most cases, government don't even get something back until the end of the concession. But we've seen here, some of the PPPs we do, yes, you may need some money coming back to government. Negotiation challenges. Negotiation is very important when it comes to PPPs. No agreement is the same. We need to bear in mind. And all is based on negotiation. No agreement is the same. So our focus is we need to get good negotiation skills. We need to know what is our interest, what is the best for us, and make sure we negotiate for the best out of the agreement. And this is what the other party does, the private sector too, to negotiate what is best, for them. So the negotiations, once we know that we have a common goal, we'll always reach an agreement. We just have to have an open mind and negotiate in an open way. Resistance by some stakeholders. The reason I brought this is that some of the projects you may want to implement, you may have local entities that are already providing it. And they're really happy what they're doing. And any change you want to implement, any investment you want to bring, or another party you want to bring, there will always be resistance. But I mean, we should not relent. We just have to be persistent. And it has, inshallah, everything will be possible. So we have to bear that in mind. Not fulfilling concessions. And I think that comes with lack of clarity, because there will be an agreement where government still wants to have some control, and based on some legal provisions which you have to bear. And in doing so, you renege on, relinquishing some of the responsibilities you have to the PPP, and then you are not fulfilling your side of the bargain. But it can go either way too. Once it's agreed with the private entity, although some of them don't go by the agreement, because in most cases it's just the manner the whole arrangement took place, that determines how that happened. So these are the lessons I want to share with you, and I thank you for this opportunity. Thank you.